Optimus Prime is gender neutral. RC is gender neutral. Scarlet is transgender and dating a gay man in a gimp suit. At least in my headcanon. And Cobra Commander is... well, at least he was... once a man.
Oh yes, I was a man. I was a man, yes.
Stop saying that, you hear you making me crazy.
Yes, was once a man.
Stop strangling me!
Sorry, how does that work? How can we have a Wonder Woman but no Mr. Potato Head?
Here.
Why isn't Wonder Woman
Here.
made more gender
They are
inclusive?
not getting rid
Wonder,
of... Do
you
not
call
worry.
it Wonder Person.
Don't let your
and I'll let you
fragile
have,
masculinity
I'll let you have
be
Potato Head.
threatened.
But it's
they are
always,
still having
it's never,
Mr. Potato Head.
Nobody
No
ever
one's getting rid
campaigns
of
to have
Mr.
Wonder
Potato
Woman
Head.
airbrushed, do they? No one ever says Wonder Woman's got to go. Because men don't complain about these things. It's women that complain about these things.
Seems to me the right just needs something to get angry about. Yeah, I guess I'm a little slow to the party. I mean, the right wing are always angry about something, aren't they? I like to say that this latest non-controversy was all there was to toys pissing off these screw-steppers, but no. Toys and their brands have always been the hallmark of right-wing outrage, and you'll find that the history is a lot older than you think. And not just in right-wing terms. Now, in case you've been living under a rock or sleeping with the spuds in the dirt, Mr. Potato Head is now being rebranded as just plain Potato Head. That's it. Just the brand. Mr. Potato Head is still alive and well, his pronouns are still intact, and he is still in fact Mr. Potato Head. I mean, seriously people, we're talking about an asexual toy based on a gender-neutral vegetable who literally stuffs his face in his butt. And the right wing are concerned with a never happened in the first place story about him. Her. They. Oh, I don't know, I never asked Potato Head what their pronouns are. I mean, literally, both Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head are the same shape. They're literally made out of the same mold, people, and you were forking out money for two of the same toys because one had big red lips and the other a mustache. Sometimes. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Potato Head is still a part of the Potato Head brand. And ITV are literally giving Piers Morgan airtime over this.
Why can't we be Mr.? I want to be a Mr. Thanks.
Yeah, you can
I don't
be
want
a
you
Mr.
telling me I
and
can't
you
be
can
Mr.
still buy a
And I
Mr.
want to buy
Potato Head.
Mr. Potato Head.
You're literally rowing with yourself in an empty room.
I'm not.
Just for the sake of having a row.
But like I said, toys have had a long history of outrage and controversy. Some real and some not so real. And in this episode of NJ4K, we go back in time and follow the ancestors of Potato Head and take a look at some of the most controversial toy-related events in recent history. Well, here's a name to get used to on this list. It seems everyone's favourite plastic blonde can't get a break. Barbie, feminist icon throughout the ages, has had a slip-up from time to time. But a book published in her name may have gotten what the girl with up to until 2013 already held no less than 126 careers under her belt and what those achievements were supposed to represent. Girl power. I mean, how many men do you know with such a resume under their belts? Well, it seems that the super qualified woman of the century is only good for one thing: creating and designing the ideas as a software engineer, leaving the real work and programming and talent to the men.
Mattel is now apologizing for a children's book that they put out in 2010 that is just now getting a lot of criticism. Now, the book was supposed to depict Barbie as a computer engineer, but instead it depicted Barbie as an incompetent computer engineer that needs the help of dudes to kind of figure out things like, I don't know, rebooting her computer. Disaster. So the name of the book is I Can Be a Computer Engineer, and according to reports, Barbie is depicted as a totally incompetent dependent on the help of men and unable to even restart her computer. Okay?
In fact, the book presented her as such a ditz that all she contributed to the technical front, as after installing her heart-shaped USB drive into the computer, was infecting it with a virus, which the men had to fix. Yeah, it's not exactly a good representation of female strength and versatility for an icon that has represented women for nearly 60 years, especially in 2013 when this book was published. Still, thankfully the internet was about and came to the rescue and recaptioned the book, making Barbie the actual hero with the hashtag #FeministHackerBarbie. We all miss Toys R Us, don't we? Even as adults, many of us would still venture into the store to find something collectible, pretending to buy something for our kids for Christmas or their birthdays, when what we were really doing was looking for the latest Siege of Cybertron Transformer toy. At least, admittedly, that's what I was doing. But imagine some parents' shock when they found in the store the now long deceased Walter White from the hit show Breaking Bad, complete with toy crystal meth within their 8-year-old's reach. Well, so horrified by the toy were visiting parents, a petition went out to remove the toys from the shelf, which was actually successful, despite the fact that the company insisted that they were designed for ages 15 and up. Which is all very well, but doesn't help very much when your commercials on TV are designed to tempt kids to get their parents to take them to Toys R Us in the first place. It seems that the mass market corporation of Toys R Us simply had little understanding of the difference between the mainstream and the specialty toys that they were selling at the time. In fact, these toys were actually probably better off in a comic store than within the reach of impressionable children. It's a good thing that these toys weren't educational, I guess. Mattel. Such a titan of inclusion, to the point that if representation presents a problem for them personally, they erase the problem altogether. In 1997, decked in her tiny pink wheelchair and her pink backpack, Becky was introduced to the Barbie world with tremendous fanfare and popularity, selling 6,000 toys in under 2 weeks alone, assuring that Becky would at least remain a mainstay in the Barbie world for at least 20 years. Was it a nice gesture, or a selfish marketing ploy and an early example of virtue signaling? Who can say? What we can say is, despite her inclusion into the Barbie world, she was very much left out of everything else, including the very epicenter of the Barbie world, the Barbie Dreamhouse, being unable to fit through the doors with her wheelchair. Mattel promised to fix the problem, and even though it took them 20 years to do it, they finally fixed the issue by cancelling Becky off the line. That's right, folks. Instead of remodeling the problem with the house, they literally fired one of their most popular toys in the franchise who just happened to be disabled. But not before considering making her wheelchair slightly smaller so that they could fit the doors. That's right, folks. According to Mattel, if the disabled can't adapt to their world, they just cancel you. Smooth, Mattel. Real smooth. You know, it's ironic that the right took issue with a picture of Optimus Prime, a literal transforming robot proudly waving the LGBTQ flag. I mean, his motto is literally, freedom is the right of all sentient beings. Not except those I don't happen to agree with on religious grounds. But that being said, Transformers is sadly not without its own controversy with attitudes towards gender. It was a battle alone with Hasbro to include RC in the Transformers movie alone, as the company literally believed that a female Transformer would be pointless for a toy line largely targeted at boys. But she soon proved the argument wrong, becoming one of the most popular Transformers in the franchise despite never having a toy release of her own for 25 years. Simon Furman's approach certainly didn't help with his second attempt to correct a mistake he made in RC being the equivalent of virtual signal in his UK version of her origin. But when IDW included RC in her own spotlight, they literally presented us with an insane psychopath of an Autobot who was driven mad when her original protoform was literally forced into a gender change in a scientific attempt to include gender into the Transformers gene pool. Of course, this rendition of RC didn't come without its own controversy, when the creator of the other titular female Transformer, Windblade, Marjorie Scott, came out and criticized Furman's approach to the issues of gender, saying, "In a vacuum, Furman's story is completely legitimate. The idea that someone is fundamentally changed against their will and struggles rages against that is a really interesting idea. The issues I have with Furman's choice is that we don't exist in a vacuum, and the suggestion that 1. Women only exist as an aberration, 2. Being a woman is inherently traumatic, and 3. Being a woman is any correlation to mental illness are extremely upsetting." Do I think Furman was trying to make a statement about human women with RC's origins? No. In fact, the largest share of the blame lies with the tokenization of women in the brand in general. The actual problem I personally have with Spotlight RC, without mentioning the obvious and perhaps unintentional connotations of the story itself, is its sad but oft-times overused trope of using violation to make women stronger and more self-reliant. The tragedy comes across almost as justified because look at what an effective warrior she's become as a result of her trauma. It's quite sickening in a way, and really something that needs to be addressed on a cultural level, especially if RC, a robot of all species, herself fell victim to one of the most abused tropes in fiction. Now, I don't really think Simon Furman hates women, but I do think he has, or had at least some misunderstanding as to what women want. But Spotlight wasn't the first time Furman rocked the boat on gender issues with RC. Back in 1987, with issue 234 of the Transformers UK comic, Simon Furman wrote Prime's Rib, as yet another origin story explaining RC's perceived gender, with Optimus Prime trying to appease a group of angry feminists who are quite literally upset that there was no female representation in a race of largely genderless robots. Admittedly, we can only assume that every Transformer they came across sounded male, but that's a huge assumption on our part, even if we put the animated series aside. No, let's not do that, as the animated series did actually introduce female Transformers long before RC was even a thing, with Alita 1 and her band. They even hinted at some sort of romance between Optimus and Alita at the time. So really, Prime's Rib comes across as a pointless venture into the Transformers lore. But I digress. Optimus Prime's solution to the gender representation in this problem was, and I kid you not, literally create woman. And even though RC manages to prove herself when a group of Decepticons crash the party, the fact that the story was written to appease militant feminism comes across as really a poorly thought out joke. Now, I'm sure Simon took the story seriously at the time, but when you think about it, none of the other Transformers were ever given solid origin stories, save for a few of the major hitters. So giving RC one seemed more like a justification for Simon and some of the male detractors that he may have spoken to than actually protests from any women he came across, who really at the time didn't care about Transformers in the first place. And quite frankly, no one was laughing. This is why Windblade works so well though with audience. We don't have an actual origin to pinpoint, only that her function as a city speaker holds some unique mystery that is so much more compelling than understand why she, as a female bot, exists in the first place. Now don't get me wrong, as a Transformer fan myself, I have great respect for Simon Furman's contribution to the lore that has made him Transformers more than just a simple toy line, but in RC's case, perhaps it would have been better just to accept that she's a Transformer that looks and sounds feminine. And really, when you think about it, any justification for that just seems to be superfluous. If anything though, Simon Furman's missteps went some way to fixing the issues of a race of mechanical beings in which gender was arbitrary rather than genetic or biological, by allowing us to look at the relationships they developed in a different light. And whilst I take issue with the comic itself, I do feel it did lead the way to a more beautiful approaches to the issue of non-binary gender and relationships in the Transformers universe with the Lost Light series. I mean, Cyclonus and Tailgate, who not want that pairing? I now picture Cyclonus with a female voice because, come on, she's a real femme at heart.
I think it's really a good idea because homelessness affects everybody at different economic levels. I actually think it's a good teaching tool.
I find the whole concept to be extremely disturbing, and it's not a doll that I would ever buy for a child.
So I don't even see why you would make a homeless doll anyway, unless the homeless doll was going to benefit the proceeds to homeless people.
I'm afraid that they're going to pick up the idea that it's okay, that it's an accepted segment of society, that some children are homeless and some children are not.
Now, being Scottish, I'm not all that familiar with the American Girl doll brand, but from what I gather, they're a particularly expensive brand of dolls, selling for as much as $100 a piece. The brand has its own store in New York, which takes up an entire block apparently, and every doll has an intricate history behind them, from escaped slave doll to the Holocaust survivor doll, bringing awareness to these issues to children, which in my mind is no bad thing, despite the hefty price tag. But the doll that apparently went too far came with Gwen Thompson, whose history sadly involved her father leaving her and her mother losing the house, and them ending up living in a car. Now, the true tragedy with this girl is not only her sad story, but sadly more twofold than that. One, that adults okay with a line of dolls that tell stories branching from slavery to the Holocaust thought that bringing homelessness to the children's eye was going a step too far. In particular, rich parents who could afford these dolls for their kids in the first place.
Mother left the family, mother lost her job, and now she's homeless. So the question is this doll, would you be okay having your daughter? Is it appropriate? Would you be okay, Vince, with your daughter having this doll? Why?
Because I just don't think it's necessary. When my daughter started to get into this, she was 6 years old. Mm-hmm. She got out of it at 10. I don't believe that a child between the ages of 6 and 10, which is the targeted audience here, needs to know and learn about the perils and the terribleness of the homeless situation. I think kids should be kids at a certain age.
The second tragedy is that being her $95 price tag didn't come with any contribution to charitable organizations designed to combat homelessness, and any television news piece I can find on Gwen didn't even touch on this tragedy. Poor Gwen sadly not only came with a tragic backstory, but left behind her a sad history and legacy of ignorance that really shows the true state of privileged Americans and how they choose to ignore the plight of the homelessness at the time. Sadly, the very same people who, if in power in city councils, would put money into aggressive architecture designed to make it even more difficult for people like Gwen and her mother to lay down their head for a good night's sleep. This toy was not so much as bad as it was a bad example of the money-making adults who exploited her plight to begin with.